The call came at 3:47 a.m., my commanding officer's voice cutting through the darkness like a blade. Reeves, stand down. Your family contacted the Pentagon. They're saying you've gone rogue. In that moment, staring at my team of SEALs positioned around my parents' house in Millbrook Heights, I realized they had chosen her over me one final time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Lieutenant Commander Zara Reeves, and from wherever you're watching this, you need to understand something. When your own blood sells you out to save the woman who destroyed your life, sometimes you have to remind them what loyalty actually costs. Have you ever had your parents look you dead in the eye and choose your sister's lies over your military service record? Because 3 days ago, I learned what betrayal tastes like when it comes from the people who raised you. It started 2 weeks earlier when I came home to Millbrook Heights on my first leave in 18 months. 18 months of classified operations, of carrying secrets that could topple governments, of bleeding for a country that didn't even know my name. I'd been stationed with SEAL Team Echo, running Black Ops missions across 3 continents, and all I wanted was 72 hours of normalcy with the family I'd been fighting to protect. But when I walked into our family home on Sycamore Drive, the house where I'd grown up dreaming of serving my country, I found my parents hosting a welcome home party. Not for me, for my twin sister, Cassidy, who'd just been released from federal prison after serving 2 years for embezzling military funds. The same sister who'd forged my signature on documents that nearly cost me my security clearance. The same sister who'd stolen my identity to take out loans she never intended to pay back while I was deployed in Syria. There she stood, in my childhood living room, wearing a yellow sundress that made her look innocent, accepting congratulations from our parents like she was the hero returning from war. My mother, Patricia, was actually crying tears of joy while hanging a welcome home banner that should have been mine. My father, Robert, was grilling burgers on the deck, telling neighbors how proud he was that both his girls were finally home safe. Both his girls. Like we'd both been serving our country, instead of one of us betraying it. I stood in the doorway in my dress blues, duffel bag heavy on my shoulder, watching my sister accept condolences for her difficult time and praise for getting her life back on track. Not a single person acknowledged that I'd just returned from a mission where 3 of my teammates didn't make it home. Not one person thanked me for the sacrifice I'd made while Cassidy was living in minimum security, getting 3 meals a day and conjugal visits from her boyfriend. When my mother finally noticed me, her face didn't light up. It fell. "Oh," she said, like I was an uninvited guest crashing someone else's celebration. My father walked over, beer in hand, and the first words out of his mouth weren't, "Welcome home," or "We missed you," or "Thank you for your service." He said, "Your sister's been through hell, so let's not make this about you, okay? She needs our support right now." She needs support. The woman who'd stolen from the United States Navy while I was getting shot at in Kandahar needed support. And I, the one who'd actually earned my uniform, needed to step back and let her have her moment. That's when Cassidy walked over with that smile she'd perfected in childhood, the one that convinced our parents I was always the troublemaker, even when she was the one breaking rules. "Zara," she squealed, throwing her arms around me like we were best friends instead of sisters who hadn't spoken since her arrest. "I'm so glad you're here. I was just telling everyone how you inspired me to turn my life around." Inspired her. While she was embezzling money meant for military families, I was apparently inspiring her from a forward operating base in Afghanistan. But here's what broke me. Our parents believed her. They stood there nodding like she'd found religion instead of found guilty on federal charges. They looked at her like she was their success story, and at me like I was the complication they hadn't planned for. My mother actually pulled me aside and whispered, "She's fragile right now, honey. Prison was really hard on her. Maybe you could stay at the Marriott downtown, just until she gets settled back home." Stay at a hotel? In my hometown.
After 18 months of sleeping on cots in combat zones, my mother was asking me to get a hotel room so my criminal sister could have her childhood bedroom back?
That night, sitting in a sterile hotel room overlooking the highway I used to drive to high school, I stared at my phone and saw the family group chat I'd been removed from. Screenshots started coming from my cousin Trevor, the only family member who still had a backbone. The chat was full of messages about how Cassidy deserved a fresh start and how Zara always was too intense about everything and how family means forgiveness. Family means forgiveness? But apparently it doesn't mean loyalty, honor, or recognizing that one daughter had spent 2 years protecting American interests, while the other had spent 2 years in Club Fed playing victim. I opened my laptop and pulled up Cassidy's prison records I could access thanks to my security clearance. What I found made my blood run cold. She hadn't just embezzled military funds, she'd been selling information about base security to her boyfriend, a known associate of foreign agents. Information that could have compromised every mission I'd been on for the past 3 years. My sister wasn't just a thief, she was a traitor. And my parents were throwing her a parade while asking me to sleep in a hotel. That's when I made the call to my team commander and requested an emergency security review of my family's clearance status. Because if Cassidy was compromising national security, and if my parents were harboring someone under federal investigation for treason, then Lieutenant Commander Zara Reeves had a duty that went beyond blood. I had no idea that decision would lead to 8 Navy SEALs surrounding the house where I used to play hopscotch, or that my parents would call the Pentagon to report their own daughter as a rogue operator. But when you choose the wrong side in a war between loyalty and family, sometimes the uniform wins. And I was still wearing mine. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Let me properly introduce myself before this story goes any further, because you need to understand exactly who you're dealing with here. My name is Lieutenant Commander Zara Reeves, United States Navy SEALs, and I've spent the last 6 years of my life earning a reputation that most people only see in movies. When other 28-year-old women are posting Instagram stories about their weekend brunch, I'm coordinating hostage extractions in countries you can't find on a map. But here's what I need you to understand from wherever you're watching this. Have you ever worked your entire life to become someone your family could be proud of, only to discover they were proud of you for the wrong reasons? Have you ever sacrificed everything to protect the people you love, just to find out they never saw you as the protector? They saw you as the weapon they could point at their problems? Because 3 weeks ago, I learned that my parents didn't raise a daughter. They raised a solution. And when that solution started asking questions they didn't want to answer, they decided to trade me in for a prettier, more convenient model. I grew up in Millbrook Heights, a quiet military town about 40 minutes outside Norfolk Naval Base. My father, Robert Reeves, spent 22 years as a Navy logistics coordinator before retiring to a desk job at the local VA office. My mother, Patricia, worked as a base school teacher, helping military kids adjust to the constant moving that comes with military life. We lived in a modest 2-story house on Sycamore Drive, the kind of place where neighbors still wave to each other and kids ride bikes without helmets. From the outside, we looked like the perfect military family. 2 parents who understood the sacrifice, twin daughters who embodied the values they taught us. But here's what the neighbors didn't see. From the time Cassidy and I were 12 years old, our parents had already decided which twin would be the success story and which one would be the safety net. Cassidy was beautiful, charming, the kind of girl who could talk her way out of trouble with a smile and batting of eyelashes. She was homecoming queen, prom princess, the daughter our parents showed off at church socials and community events. I was the reliable one, the problem solver, the daughter they called when something needed to be fixed, handled, or made to disappear. When Cassidy got arrested for shoplifting at 16, they called me to use my clean record to convince the store owner not to press charges. When she crashed Dad's truck while driving drunk at 17, they called me to use my ROTC connections to keep it off her permanent record.
When she dropped out of college after one semester because she was too stressed, they called me to use my military scholarship money to pay back her student loans so it wouldn't hurt the family's credit. Every time Cassidy created a problem, I became the solution. And every time I solved it, they praised me for being such a good sister and so responsible and exactly what this family needs.
So when I graduated from the Naval Academy at 22, summa cum laude, with a commission as a naval officer, you'd think that would be the proudest moment of my parents' lives. But I'll never forget what my mother said when I called to tell them I'd been selected for SEAL training, the most elite military program in the world, something less than 1% of candidates ever achieve. She said, "That's nice, honey, but don't you think it's time you settled down? Cassidy met a wonderful man and we're hoping for grandchildren soon." Cassidy met a wonderful man? While I was becoming one of the most lethal weapons the United States military had ever produced, my mother was more excited about my sister's dating life. But I pushed forward anyway, because I believed that eventually my achievements would speak for themselves. I completed SEAL training with the second highest scores in my class. I earned my trident in record time. I was deployed to Syria, Afghanistan, Somalia, and 3 countries I still can't name in public. I saved lives, completed impossible missions, and earned commendations that most career military officers never see. And every time I came home on leave, every single time, the first question wasn't about my service or my missions or the fact that I was literally risking my life for my country. The first question was always, "How's Cassidy doing? She's been having such a hard time." Hard time? While I was jumping out of helicopters into hostile territory, Cassidy was having a hard time deciding between her 3 different boyfriends, all of whom she was simultaneously dating while living in our parents' basement rent-free. But the breaking point came 8 months ago, when I got a call from the Navy's Criminal Investigation Service. They were investigating financial irregularities in military fund distributions, and my name had come up as a person of interest, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because someone had been using my identity and security credentials to access classified financial systems. Someone who knew my social security number, my mother's maiden name, my first pet's name, and every other piece of personal information that families share without thinking. Someone who had access to all my military documentation because I trusted my family with copies of my service records. Someone named Cassidy Reeves, who had been systematically stealing from military families for 2 years while I was overseas, using my credentials and my reputation to cover her tracks. The investigation cleared me of wrongdoing when it revealed something that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. When the CIS agents interviewed my parents, asking if they had any knowledge of Cassidy's activities, my mother said, "Well, we knew she was having money troubles, but we figured Zara would handle it when she got back. She always takes care of Cassidy's problems." They knew. They knew my sister was committing federal crimes using my identity, and they assumed I would handle it like I'd handled everything else. They watched her destroy my reputation, compromise my security clearance, and betray everything I'd sworn to protect, and they expected me to clean it up quietly when I got home? That's when I realized I hadn't been raised to be their daughter. I'd been raised to be their janitor, someone to clean up messes, solve problems, and disappear back to wherever I came from until the next crisis needed handling. Well, this crisis was about to need a different kind of handling, because Lieutenant Commander Zara Reeves wasn't just a daughter anymore, she was a weapon. And weapons don't clean up messes. They eliminate them. The confrontation happened at 0600 hours on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after that welcome home party for Cassidy. I'd spent those 3 days in the Marriott reviewing every piece of evidence the CIS had shared with me, cross-referencing financial records, and building a case that would make a federal prosecutor weep with joy. But before I handed my sister over to the authorities,
I needed to look my parents in the eye and give them one chance to choose the right side. I drove to the house in my rental car, a black Dodge Challenger that felt more like home than the childhood bedroom I was no longer welcome in. The morning fog was just lifting off Sycamore Drive, and I could see the kitchen lights on through the windows. My parents were early risers, a habit drilled into them by decades of military life. What I didn't expect was to see Cassidy's silver Honda Civic in the driveway, the one she'd bought with money that I now knew came from stolen military funds. I walked up to the front door and used my key. They hadn't changed the locks yet, though I suspected that was coming soon. The house smelled like coffee and bacon, the same breakfast my mother had made every Tuesday for as long as I can remember. But when I stepped into the kitchen, the warm family scene I'd grown up with felt like a stage set designed to mock me.
Cassidy sat at the breakfast bar in pink silk pajamas, scrolling through her phone while eating off the good china, the plates we'd only used for special occasions when I was growing up. My mother stood at the stove, humming while she cooked, wearing the apron I'd sent her from Germany 3 years ago. My father sat at the kitchen table reading the Norfolk Ledger-Star, his reading glasses perched on his nose like he didn't have a care in the world. They looked like a perfect family, peaceful, content, complete, without me. "Morning," I said, my voice cutting through their domestic bliss like a knife through silk. My mother spun around, spatula in hand, and her face immediately tightened with that expression I'd learned to recognize, the look she got when I was about to complicate her carefully managed world. "Zara, what are you doing here so early?" "We need to talk, all of us." I looked directly at Cassidy, who hadn't bothered to glance up from her phone, "about the money." The kitchen went dead silent. My father slowly lowered his newspaper, and I watched Cassidy's thumbs stop moving across her screen. But it was my mother who broke the silence, and her tone carried the kind of dismissive authority she'd used on me since childhood. "Oh, honey, and not this again. We talked about this at the party. Cassidy made some mistakes, but she's paid for them. Prison was punishment enough. Can't we just move forward as a family?" Move forward. Like the 2 years of federal crimes against military families were just a teenage phase she'd grown out of. "Mom," I said, my voice steady and controlled the way it got during mission briefings, "Cassidy didn't just make mistakes. She committed treason. She sold military security information to foreign contacts. She stole from Gold Star families, families whose sons and daughters died serving our country. And she did it using my identity." My father finally spoke, his voice carrying the tired authority of a man who'd spent decades managing military personnel. "Zara, you're being dramatic. Your sister had some financial troubles and made poor choices, but she's family. We don't throw family away over money." Dramatic. The same word they'd used to dismiss every concern I'd ever raised about Cassidy's behavior. When I'd warned them she was stealing from my college fund, I was being dramatic. When I'd told them she was forging my signature on documents, I was being dramatic. When I explained that her actions could cost me my security clearance and destroy my military career, I was being dramatic. But when she was actually committing federal crimes that endangered national security, suddenly I was still the problem. This isn't about money, Dad. This is about treason. Cassidy gave classified base security information to Marcus Chen, who we now know is connected to Chinese intelligence operatives, information that could have gotten American soldiers killed. Cassidy finally looked up from her phone, and for the first time in 3 days, I saw something other than practiced innocence in her eyes. I saw a calculation. She was trying to figure out how much I knew and how much damage control she needed to do. "Zara, you're scaring me. Marcus was just my boyfriend. We never talked about anything important. I would never hurt you or your career." Never hurt me, while she was literally destroying everything I'd built. "Your boyfriend," I repeated, pulling out my phone and opening the CIS file I'd been authorized to share. "Marcus Chen, age 34, known associate of Foreign Intelligence Services, currently under federal surveillance for espionage activities.
The same Marcus Chen who received detailed base security protocols, duty rosters, and classified personnel information from an email account registered under my name. I watched my parents' faces as I scrolled through the evidence. Email after email, financial transfer after financial transfer, security breach after security breach. All of it traceable back to their golden daughter and her boyfriend. My mother's face went white. My father's hands began to shake slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. But Cassidy just looked annoyed, like I was ruining her morning with inconvenient facts. "Those emails aren't real," she said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "You probably made them up to get me in trouble. You always were jealous that Mom and Dad loved me more." There it was, the truth she'd been dancing around for 28 years, finally said out loud. They loved her more. And she knew it, had always known it, and had used it as a weapon against me for our entire lives. But what shocked me wasn't Cassidy's admission. It was my parents' reaction. They didn't deny it. They didn't rush to reassure me that they loved us equally. They just sat there, letting the truth hang in the air like smoke from a house fire.
My father cleared his throat, the way he did when he was about to deliver orders he knew wouldn't be popular. "Zara, your sister has been through enough. She's served her time, and now she's trying to rebuild her life. If you pursue this, whatever this is, you'll destroy any chance she has at a fresh start." "And what about my fresh start?" The question came out harder than I'd intended, but I was past caring about tone. What about the fact that she destroyed my reputation, compromised my security clearance, and made me a person of interest in a federal investigation? What about the fact that every mission I've been on for the past 2 years could have been compromised because she was selling information about my unit? My mother set down her spatula and turned to face me fully, and I recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same look she'd given me when I was 8 years old and had tattled on Cassidy for breaking her favorite vase. Disappointment. Not in the daughter who'd committed the crime, but in the daughter who'd had the audacity to speak up about it. "Zara Marie Reeves," she said, using my full name the way she had when I was in trouble as a child. "Your sister made mistakes, but she's trying to do better. You, on the other hand, are trying to destroy your own family. That's not the daughter we raised." The daughter they raised. Standing there in my dress blues, looking at the people who'd brought me into this world, I finally understood what I'd been to them all along. I wasn't their daughter. I was their enforcer, the strong one, their responsible one, the one who fixed problems and asked for nothing in return. But the moment I stopped fixing and started demanding answers, I became the problem. "You're right," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the kind of authority that made enemy combatants surrender. "I'm not the daughter you raised. The daughter you raised would have covered this up, paid Cassidy's legal fees, and quietly accepted the end of her military career to protect the family reputation." I looked around the kitchen one more time. At the breakfast bar where I'd done homework while Cassidy got ready for dates. At the stove where my mother had taught me to cook so I could help with dinner while Cassidy watched TV. At the table where my father had helped me with math problems while Cassidy was out breaking curfew. But I'm not that daughter anymore. I'm Lieutenant Commander Zara Reeves, United States Navy SEALs, and I took an oath to protect this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. I pulled out my phone and showed them the screen, where I'd already typed out a message to my commanding officer requesting immediate assistance with a security threat involving compromised personnel. "Unfortunately for all of you," I said, my finger hovering over the send button, "that oath doesn't include a family exemption." The silence that followed was the kind of quiet that comes right before an explosion. And in that moment, looking at their faces, I realized they still didn't understand what they'd done. They thought this was about hurt feelings and sibling rivalry. They had no idea they'd just declared war on a Navy SEAL. My finger was still hovering over the send button when my mother's voice cut through the kitchen like a blade dipped in poison. What she said next didn't just break my heart, it shattered every illusion I'd ever held about what family meant.
You know what, Zara? Go ahead. Call your precious Navy friends. Call whoever you want. She crossed her arms and looked at me with a coldness I'd never seen before, not even when she was disciplining us as children. Cassidy made mistakes, yes, but at least she never forgot where she came from. At least she never acted like she was too good for this family. Hero? She said it like it was a dirty word. My father stood up from the table, and I thought for a moment he might defend me, might tell my mother she was going too far. Instead, he joined her assault with the precision of a man who'd been planning this conversation for years.
Your mother's right, Zara. You waltzed in here in your dress blues, acting like you're better than all of us because you jump out of airplanes for a living. But what have you actually accomplished? You're 28 years old, no husband, no children, no real life. Just some military fantasy where you pretend you're saving the world. No real life. 6 years of elite military service. Operations that saved countless civilian lives. Missions that prevented terrorist attacks on American soil. And my father called it a fantasy? But Cassidy, sweet, innocent Cassidy, delivered the killing blow. She set down her phone and looked at me with a smile that was pure malice, the mask finally slipping completely. "Oh, Zara," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You really thought they were proud of you, didn't you? You thought all those medals and commendations meant something to them?" She stood up and walked over to me, getting close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume I now knew was paid for with stolen military funds. "Here's the truth, sister. They've been embarrassed by you for years. Do you know what they tell people when they ask about their daughters? They say, 'Cassidy is getting married soon. She's going to give us beautiful grandchildren.' And Zara, well, Zara's in the military." She paused, savoring the moment like fine wine. They say it the same way they'd say, "Zara has cancer," or "Zara's addicted to drugs," like it's something shameful they have to endure. The kitchen was spinning around me, but Cassidy wasn't done. She was enjoying this too much to stop now. "They don't understand why you chose to be a soldier when you could have been a wife and mother. They think you're damaged, broken somehow. Mom used to cry to her friends, wondering what she did wrong to make you so aggressive." She tilted her head with mock concern. "They love me because I'm normal. I want normal things. Marriage, babies, a house in the suburbs. You want to play army with a bunch of men who probably don't even respect you." Every word was a surgical strike, aimed at the parts of me I'd always been most insecure about. The choice to prioritize service over family, the relationships I'd sacrificed for my career, the loneliness that came with being one of the few women in an elite military unit. But it was my mother who delivered the final, devastating blow. "Cassidy's right," she said, her voice quiet, but filled with a venom that 28 years of motherhood couldn't hide. "We never wanted you to join the military, Zara. We wanted you to go to college, meet a nice boy, get married, and give us grandchildren like normal daughters do. When you chose the Navy over family, you chose to become a stranger to us." She walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up a framed photo, one I'd never seen before. It was from Cassidy's high school graduation, all three of them smiling and laughing together. I wasn't in it because I'd been at the Naval Academy, graduating summa cum laude and receiving a commission as a naval officer. "This is our family," she said, holding up the photo. "The three of us. You made your choice when you decided that playing soldier was more important than being our daughter." Playing soldier. 6 years of the most elite military training in the world, reduced to a child's game. My father nodded in agreement, emboldened by my mother's cruelty.
And now you want to destroy the family you already abandoned? You want to send your sister to prison because she made some poor financial decisions while you were off gallivanting around the world pretending to be something you're not? Pretending to be something I'm not. I was Lieutenant Commander Zara Reeves, United States Navy SEALs. I had killed enemy combatants in defense of American interests. I had extracted hostages from impossible situations. I had prevented terrorist attacks that would have cost thousands of American lives. And my father called it a fantasy. But the cruelest revelation was still coming. Cassidy walked back to the breakfast bar and picked up her phone, scrolling through something before turning the screen toward me. Oh, and Zara, since we're being honest now, you should know I didn't just stumble into this situation with Marcus. I sought him out specifically because I knew he was connected to intelligence services. I knew exactly what I was doing when I gave him information about your unit. I knew it could compromise your missions, maybe even get some of your teammates killed. The world stopped moving. Everything went silent except for the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper.
Because, Cassidy said, her voice matter-of-fact like she was discussing the weather, I was tired of living in your shadow. Tired of hearing about Lieutenant Commander Perfect and her heroic military service. Tired of watching Mom and Dad pretend to be proud of you when we all knew they just wanted you to come home and be normal. She leaned against the counter, completely casual, like she hadn't just admitted to committing treason against her own sister. So I decided to level the playing field. If I couldn't be the military hero, I'd make sure you couldn't be either. I just didn't expect to get caught. She shrugged. But honestly, even prison was worth it to watch you finally understand that you never mattered as much as you thought you did. My parents stood there, listening to their daughter admit to deliberately endangering American military personnel, including their other daughter, and their faces showed nothing but acceptance. Not shock, not horror, not even disappointment. Just the calm understanding of people who had always known this was who she really was. "We knew," my mother said quietly, confirming my worst fears. "We knew Cassidy was angry about the attention you got for your military service. We knew she resented the way people talked about you like you were some kind of hero. And honestly, Zara, we understood her feelings." They knew. They had known their daughter was committing treason, endangering American lives, compromising national security, and they understood her feelings. My father stepped forward, and for a moment I thought he might finally show some paternal instinct, some protective impulse toward the daughter who had sworn an oath to defend his country. Instead, he said the words that ended my relationship with my family forever. "Cassidy was right to bring you down a peg. You needed to learn that being a soldier doesn't make you special. It just makes you a tool for people smarter than you." He paused, letting that sink in. "And tools don't get to judge the people who use them." I stood there, in my dress blues, surrounded by the people who had brought me into this world, and finally understood the truth. I hadn't been their daughter for years. I had been their embarrassment, their disappointment, their tool to clean up messes when convenient, and their target when someone needed to be blamed. But they made one critical miscalculation. They thought breaking me down would make me surrender. They had no idea they'd just declared war on someone trained to win at any cost. I picked up my phone and, without breaking eye contact with any of them, pressed send on the message to my commanding officer. Then I opened a new message to the CIS agent handling Cassidy's case. "You want to know what makes me special?" I said, my voice deadly calm. "It's not the uniform or the medals or the missions. It's the fact that when someone threatens American security, I don't care if they're family. I eliminate the threat." I typed out a detailed message requesting immediate federal intervention for ongoing security breaches and active foreign intelligence connections, and hit send.
"Congratulations," I said, looking at each of them one final time. "You just chose the wrong side in a war you didn't even know you were fighting." The response from my commanding officer, Captain Hayes, came back in under 3 minutes. 2 words that changed everything. Authorization granted. I walked out of that kitchen without another word, leaving my family staring at their phones as notifications started flooding in. By the time I reached my rental car, I was already receiving callbacks from CIS Agent Rodriguez, NSA Counterintelligence, and the Pentagon Security Review Board. What my family didn't understand is that when you betray a Navy SEAL, you don't just betray one person, you betray an entire network of people trained to eliminate threats with surgical precision. But I wasn't operating on emotion anymore. The hurt, disappointed daughter who had walked into that kitchen was gone, replaced by Lieutenant Commander Reeves, and she had work to do. My first call was to Agent Rodriguez, who had been waiting for exactly this kind of cooperation from me for months. "Agent Rodriguez, this is Lieutenant Commander Reeves. I'm ready to provide full cooperation with your investigation into my sister's activities. I have evidence of ongoing security breaches and active foreign intelligence connections." "Lieutenant Commander, are you somewhere secure where we can talk?" I was sitting in my car in the driveway of my childhood home, watching my parents and sister through the kitchen window as they frantically made phone calls of their own. "Secure enough. What do you need from me?" "Everything. Phone records, financial documents, any communications you might have regarding your sister's activities. We also need to discuss protective measures for you, given that your security clearance has been compromised." Protective measures? That phrase sent a chill down my spine, but not because I was afraid, because it meant the situation was even worse than I realized.
Within 2 hours, I was sitting in a secure conference room at Norfolk Naval Base, surrounded by more acronyms than a military briefing. CIS, NSA, FBI, and Pentagon officials whose job titles I couldn't repeat in public. The woman leading the meeting was Deputy Director Sarah Chen from Naval Intelligence. No relation to Marcus Chen, she assured me with dark humor. "Lieutenant Commander Reeves," Deputy Director Chen began, opening a file that was easily 3 inches thick. "Your cooperation today has accelerated an investigation that's been ongoing for 8 months. Your sister's activities weren't just limited to financial fraud or selling base security information. She and Marcus Chen were part of a larger network feeding intelligence to foreign operatives." She slid a photograph across the table. It was surveillance footage of Cassidy meeting with Marcus and 2 other men I didn't recognize, taken outside a coffee shop in Virginia Beach. "These men are confirmed Chinese intelligence operatives. Your sister provided them with detailed information about SEAL Team Echo's operational structure, deployment schedules, and mission parameters for the past 18 months. 18 months? Every mission I'd been on, every teammate who'd trusted me with their lives, every classified operation that had kept Americans safe, all of it compromised by the woman who shared my DNA. The good news," Deputy Director Chen continued, "is that we've been monitoring their communications and have prevented any significant operational compromises. The bad news is that your sister has been actively recruiting other military family members to provide similar information. She showed me a list of names, wives, siblings, and children of active-duty military personnel, all of whom had been approached by Cassidy with offers of easy money in exchange for harmless information about their family members' service. 6 of these individuals have already been arrested. 3 more are under surveillance. Your sister wasn't just a traitor, Lieutenant Commander. She was building a network of traitors." The room was silent as I processed the magnitude of what my family had enabled. Not just one act of betrayal, but an ongoing operation to compromise American military security from the inside. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. "What we need from you now, Lieutenant Commander, is to act as an operational asset. Your sister trusts you, or at least she did until this morning. We need you to reestablish contact and help us map the full extent of this network."
go back to my family, pretend to forgive them, help them dig themselves deeper while we gathered evidence to bury them all. It was exactly the kind of undercover operation I'd trained for, except this time the targets were the people who had raised me. "What's the timeline?" I asked. Deputy Director Chen smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "We move fast. Your sister made a crucial mistake this morning when she admitted to deliberately compromising your missions. That's not just treason, that's attempted murder of federal agents. We have 48 hours to build a case that will put her and her network away for life." They handed me a file folder marked Operation Homecoming, a name that would have been funny if it wasn't so accurate. Inside were detailed instructions for my role in the investigation, including a script for reestablishing contact with my family and a list of specific information I needed to extract from Cassidy. "Lieutenant Commander," Deputy Director Chen said as the meeting was ending, "I want you to understand something. What you're doing, turning against your own family to protect national security, it goes against every human instinct we have. But it's also the most patriotic thing any of us will ever witness." She stood up and extended her hand. "Your country will never be able to publicly acknowledge what you're about to do, but everyone in this room will remember. And when this is over, you'll have earned something more valuable than any medal we could give you." "What's that?" "The knowledge that when it mattered most, you chose America over blood. Not many people are strong enough to make that choice." I drove back to the Marriott in silence, the operation folder on the passenger seat like a roadmap to the complete destruction of my family. But somewhere between the naval base and the hotel, something shifted in my chest. The weight I'd been carrying for 28 years, the weight of being the fixer, the cleaner, the daughter who sacrificed everything for people who never appreciated it, was gone. In its place was something I'd only felt in combat situations: crystal clear purpose. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Zara, we need to talk. Come home for dinner tonight. We can work this out as a family." Work it out? After everything they'd said, everything they'd revealed, they still thought this was something that could be smoothed over with a family dinner and some empty apologies? I texted back, "I'll be there at 1800 hours. We need to discuss this situation properly." What they didn't know was that I'd be wearing a wire. What they didn't know was that CIS agents would be positioned around the house. And what they didn't know was that discussing the situation meant giving them enough rope to hang themselves with. I spent the rest of the afternoon memorizing my briefing materials and running through the conversation scenarios with Agent Rodriguez via encrypted phone calls. By evening, I was ready to walk back into that house, not as their disappointed daughter, but as a federal operative gathering evidence against enemy agents. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents had spent my entire life trying to make me more like Cassidy, softer, more compliant, more willing to put family above principles. What they'd actually done was train me to be the perfect undercover operative, someone who could separate emotion from mission objectives, someone who could smile at enemies while collecting the evidence needed to destroy them. As I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home at exactly 1800 hours, I saw the kitchen lights on again, warm and welcoming like nothing had changed since that morning. My family was probably inside right now, planning their strategy for bringing the prodigal daughter back into line. They had no idea that Lieutenant Commander Zara Reeves was about to give them a masterclass in strategic warfare. And unlike their daughter, the soldier didn't lose. I checked my wire one last time, straightened my civilian clothes, and walked toward the house with the calm confidence of someone who held all the cards. By this time tomorrow, Operation Homecoming would be complete, and my family would finally understand what it meant to face a real enemy. Too bad for them, that enemy was the daughter they'd trained to be ruthless. Walking back into that house at 1800 hours felt like entering a theater where everyone had been given a script except me. But that was fine. I'd written my own script, and it was being recorded by federal agents positioned in 3 separate vehicles around the block. The scene in the kitchen was almost comically different from 12 hours earlier. Gone was the casual cruelty, the entitled dismissal, the smug superiority. Instead, I found 3 people who looked like they'd spent the day getting a crash course in the consequences of betraying a Navy SEAL. My mother was at the stove again, but her hands were shaking as she stirred what looked like my favorite pasta sauce, a dish she hadn't made for me in over 3 years. My father sat at the table with his laptop open, frantically scrolling through what appeared to be legal websites. And Cassidy was pacing the kitchen like a caged animal, her phone pressed to her ear as she whispered urgently to someone. "Marcus, just tell me what they know. Did they freeze the accounts? Are you still at the apartment?" She froze when she saw me, ending the call quickly and forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Zara, you came back. I wasn't sure you would after this morning." After this morning. Like the systematic destruction of my understanding of family was just a minor disagreement we had over breakfast. My mother turned from the stove and I could see tears in her eyes. Whether from genuine emotion or carefully calculated manipulation, I couldn't tell. What I could tell was that someone had coached her on what to say. "Honey, we've been talking all day, and we realize we may have said some things that came out wrong. We were all emotional, and family conflicts can bring out the worst in people." Her voice had the rehearsed quality of someone who'd practiced the speech multiple times. Family conflicts. She was calling treason and 28 years of psychological manipulation a family conflict. My father closed his laptop and stood up, putting on his best military bearing, the posture he used when he wanted to project authority and trustworthiness. "Zara, I want you to know that your mother and I have never been anything but proud of your service. If we gave you any other impression, that was our failure in communication, not a reflection of our true feelings." Communication failure. The morning's revelations about their embarrassment over my military career had been downgraded to a simple misunderstanding. But it was Cassidy who delivered the performance I'd been expecting. She walked over to me with tears streaming down her face, her whole body language transformed from the predatory confidence she had shown earlier. "Zara, I need you to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you judge me." She took a shaky breath, and I had to admire the acting skills that had fooled our parents for decades. "Everything I said this morning about deliberately targeting Marcus, about wanting to hurt your career, I lied." She looked directly into my eyes, and for a moment I could see the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. If I hadn't been wearing a wire and gathering evidence for a federal investigation, I might have almost believed her.
I was scared, Zara. Scared about going back to prison, scared about what people would think, scared about disappointing Mom and Dad again. So I lashed out and said horrible things designed to hurt you. Because hurt people hurt people. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But the truth is, I never meant for any of this to affect your career. Marcus told me he was an import-export business. I had no idea he was connected to intelligence services. Import-export business. A 28-year-old woman who'd lived on military bases her entire life, whose sister was a Navy SEAL, accidentally got involved with foreign intelligence operatives because she thought they were in import-export. When I found out what he really was, Cassidy continued, I tried to break it off, but he threatened me, said he'd hurt the family if I didn't keep providing information. I was trapped, Zara. I was being coerced. Coerced. The surveillance footage of her laughing and joking with Chinese intelligence operatives suddenly became evidence of her being threatened and manipulated. My father stepped forward, adding his voice to the carefully orchestrated performance. That's why we need to handle this as a family, Zara. Your sister was a victim here, not a perpetrator. If you bring federal investigators into this, they won't see the nuance. They'll just see the crimes, not the coercion. Handle this as a family. Code for help us cover this up and obstruct a federal investigation. My mother moved to the stove and began plating the pasta, her movements deliberate and domestic. I've made your favorite dinner, honey. Penne with meat sauce, garlic bread, that Caesar salad you always loved. Just like when you were little and we'd have family dinners every Sunday.
The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. They were trying to use nostalgia and comfort food to override 6 years of elite military training and a federal investigation. But I played my part perfectly, letting my shoulders relax slightly and my voice soften with just the right amount of uncertainty. I don't know what to think anymore. This morning was so intense, and then when I reported it to my superiors— You reported it? My father's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the panic underneath. I had to, Dad. When a security clearance is compromised, there are protocols, but I paused, letting them see the internal conflict they needed to believe was real. I told them I needed more time to gather information, that maybe there were extenuating circumstances they should consider. The relief in the room was palpable. Cassidy actually exhaled audibly, and my mother's hand went to her chest like she'd been holding her breath. "That's my girl," my father said, and the pride in his voice would have meant everything to me 12 hours ago. Now it was just another piece of evidence for the federal prosecutors. Cassidy sat down at the kitchen table and gestured for me to join her. "Zara, if you can just give me a chance to explain everything, all of it, I think you'll understand that I'm not the monster you think I am." Over the next hour, as we sat around that kitchen table eating pasta and garlic bread like a normal family, Cassidy laid out what she called the whole truth. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, carefully constructed to paint her as a victim while admitting to just enough wrongdoing to seem credible. According to Cassidy's new version of events, Marcus had approached her at a coffee shop in Virginia Beach, claiming to be a businessman who was impressed by her connection to military personnel. He'd offered her money, just a few $100s at first, for what he called general information about military life that he wanted to include in a book he was writing about military families. It seemed harmless, she said, her voice breaking at exactly the right moments. He asked about deployment schedules, but not specific ones, just general patterns, how often units rotated, how families coped with separations. I thought I was helping him write something that would help people understand military life better. The money had gradually increased, and so had the specificity of Marcus's questions. But by then, Cassidy claimed she was already in too deep. He had compromising photos of her, evidence of their financial relationship, and threats against the family if she tried to back out. "He showed me pictures of you, Zara, pictures of you on base, going to your apartment, at the grocery store. He said his associates could reach any of us anytime they wanted." She was crying again now, and our mother reached over to rub her shoulders comfortingly. "That's why I couldn't tell anyone. He said if I involved law enforcement or tried to warn you, they'd eliminate the threat. And by threat, he meant our family." It was a beautiful story, complete with coercion, threats, and just enough admission of guilt to seem honest. If I'd been anyone other than a trained counterintelligence operative wearing a federal wire, I might have even felt sorry for her. Instead, I leaned forward with just the right amount of sisterly concern and asked the question Agent Rodriguez had specifically requested.
Cassidy, I need to know, who else is involved? Are there other military families Marcus has approached? Because if there are, we need to warn them. Cassidy exchanged a quick glance with our parents. So quick, I almost missed it. But federal surveillance training teaches you to catch those micro-expressions, and in that split second, I saw them make a decision. "There might be," she said carefully. "Marcus mentioned other projects he was working on, other military families who were helping with his research. Do you have names? Contact information? Anything that might help us identify them?" And that's when Cassidy made the mistake that would seal her fate and the fate of everyone in her network. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through her contacts. "I can't give you everything," she said. "Marcus has ways of knowing if I've talked. But maybe I could give you a few names, people who might be in the same situation I was in." For the next 30 minutes, I sat in my childhood kitchen while my sister systematically provided federal investigators with the names, phone numbers, and detailed information about 8 military families who are actively providing intelligence to foreign operatives.
She thought she was buying time and sympathy by cooperating. What she was actually doing was handing the FBI everything they needed to roll up an entire spy network in a single coordinated operation. By the time dessert was served, my mother's famous apple pie, because of course it was, I had gathered enough evidence to put my entire family in federal prison for the rest of their natural lives. And the beautiful part was, they thought they were winning. That night, sitting in my hotel room with Agent Rodriguez, reviewing the recording from dinner, I finally understood that the evening's performance wasn't an anomaly. It was the culmination of a 28-year pattern I'd been too close to see. As we listened to my family's coordinated lies and watched Cassidy systematically betray an entire network of military families, Agent Rodriguez asked me a question that changed everything. Lieutenant Commander, this level of manipulation doesn't develop overnight. How long have they been using these tactics on you? I opened my laptop and pulled up a folder I'd created years ago. Digital copies of family photos, emails, and documents I'd saved over the years. What I'd originally kept as happy memories now looked like evidence of something much darker. "Let me show you something," I said, clicking on an email from 3 years ago. It was from my mother, sent while I was deployed in Afghanistan, with the subject line, "Missing our hero." The email was beautiful, full of love, pride, and support for my service. She talked about how she told everyone at church about my latest commendation, how she kept all my military achievements in a scrapbook, how she and Dad couldn't wait for me to come home so they could hear about my adventures. "Read that," I told Agent Rodriguez. "Then read this one, sent 2 weeks later." The second email had a very different tone. Cassidy had been arrested for check fraud, and my mother needed me to wire money for bail. But the way she presented it was masterful. Cassidy was going through a difficult time. The charges were just a misunderstanding, and the family needed to stick together during this crisis. More importantly, the email made it clear that my silence was expected. "We know you can't talk about your work, honey, and we respect that. We hope you'll give us the same respect regarding family matters. Some things are better handled privately." Agent Rodriguez studied both emails. "She praises your discretion about classified military operations, then uses that same language to demand secrecy about your sister's crimes." "It gets worse," I said, pulling up more files. "Look at this pattern." For the next hour, we went through years of correspondence, and the manipulation became crystal clear. Every time Cassidy got into serious trouble, my parents would begin the campaign weeks in advance. First would come the hero emails, building me up and expressing pride in my service. Then would come the family crisis emails, presenting Cassidy's latest criminal activity as a minor setback that required family unity. The third phase was always the same. They would emphasize how my military training made me uniquely qualified to handle situations and solve problems that regular families couldn't manage. They made me feel chosen, special, essential, right before they asked me to compromise my principles. "Here's the one that should have been a red flag," I said, opening an email from 18 months ago. My mother had written it after Cassidy was first arrested for the military fund embezzlement. "Zara, we know this situation with Cassidy looks bad from the outside, but you understand better than anyone how complex military finance can be. Sometimes good people make mistakes with paperwork and procedures. We're not asking you to do anything improper, just to help us understand the system so we can help Cassidy navigate it properly." Agent Rodriguez read it twice. "She's asking you to use your security clearance to help them understand how to better cover up your sister's crimes."
And I almost did it, I admitted. I spent 3 days researching military justice procedures, thinking I was helping my family understand a complex legal situation. I didn't realize I was helping them build a defense for a traitor. But the most damning evidence was in my photo archives. I pulled up pictures from family gatherings over the years, and Agent Rodriguez immediately noticed what I had been blind to. "Look at the body language," she said, pointing to a Christmas photo from 2 years ago.
Your parents are positioned between you and your sister. They're not facilitating a relationship between siblings. They're managing two separate relationships. She was right. In photo after photo, my parents never encouraged Cassidy and me to bond directly. They maintained separate relationships with each of us, controlling the flow of information between us. When I was home, they would tell me carefully edited versions of Cassidy's activities. When I was deployed, they would tell Cassidy carefully edited versions of my service. They kept you isolated from each other, Agent Rodriguez continued. That way, they could control the narrative for both of you. You never got Cassidy's real perspective on family dynamics, and she never got yours. I pulled up my phone and scrolled to a text thread with my cousin Trevor from 6 months ago. He tried to warn me about something, but I dismissed it at the time. Trevor: "Hey, just wanted you to know Cassidy's been telling people at family gatherings that you send her money every month to help with expenses. She's acting like you're supporting her lifestyle." My response: "That's weird, but maybe she's just embellishing to save face. You know how she is about appearances." Trevor: "Zara, she's not embellishing. She showed people bank statements, transfers from an account with your name on it." I'd never followed up on that conversation because my parents had called the next day with a family emergency that required my immediate attention. Looking back, I realized every time someone tried to give me information about Cassidy's real activities, my parents would create a distraction that redirected my focus. Agent Rodriguez was taking notes as I walked through the pattern. "Lieutenant Commander, what you're describing is a sophisticated long-term manipulation campaign. Your parents weren't just enabling your sister's criminal behavior, they were actively using you as an asset to facilitate it." She pulled up Cassidy's financial records on her laptop. "Look at this. Every time your sister received money from foreign sources, your parents would contact you with a family emergency that required financial assistance. You'd send money to help with fake crises, which freed up other funds for her to launder. The timing was perfect. Medical emergencies, car repairs, home maintenance crises, all of them happening within days of Cassidy receiving payments from Marcus Chen. My parents had been using my military salary to help clean foreign intelligence money. They turned you into an unwitting accomplice," Agent Rodriguez said. "Every dollar you sent home thinking you were helping with family emergencies was actually enabling a money laundering operation." But the cruelest revelation was still coming. Agent Rodriguez opened another file on her laptop. Surveillance footage from the coffee shop where Cassidy claimed Marcus first approached her. "This is from 18 months ago," she said, starting the video. "This is the first recorded meeting between your sister and Marcus Chen." I watched the screen as Cassidy walked into the coffee shop, not alone, but with my mother. They sat at a table for 10 minutes before Marcus arrived, and I could see them having an animated conversation pointing to papers on the table. "Your mother was there for the introduction," Agent Rodriguez said quietly. "This wasn't your sister being recruited by a predator. This was a family business meeting." The video continued, showing my mother leaving after shaking hands with Marcus, then Cassidy staying behind for what appeared to be a briefing session. My mother had not only known about Cassidy's intelligence activities from the beginning, she had facilitated them. Agent Rodriguez showed me 3 more surveillance videos over the following months. In each one, either my mother or father was present for meetings between Cassidy and Marcus. Sometimes they stayed for the entire meeting, sometimes they left after introductions, but they were always involved. Your parents weren't just enabling your sister's treason, they were active participants. This was a family conspiracy that used your reputation and security clearance as cover. I sat back in my chair, feeling like I was seeing my entire life through a different lens. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every phone call and email and text message, all of it had been part of an elaborate performance designed to keep me emotionally invested in people who were systematically betraying everything I'd sworn to protect. "There's one more thing," Agent Rodriguez said,
pulling up a final file. "We've been monitoring communications between your parents and foreign intelligence services for the past 6 months. They weren't just helping Cassidy sell information, they were selling information themselves."
She showed me intercepted messages where my father discussed my deployment schedules, my unit assignments, my security clearance level, and my access to classified information. Messages where my mother provided detailed analysis of my psychological profile, including my sense of family loyalty and my willingness to sacrifice for people I loved. "They've been intelligence assets for over 2 years," Agent Rodriguez said. "Your sister wasn't a lone wolf who got recruited. She was part of a 3-person cell that included both your parents, and their primary mission was managing you." Managing me. Not loving me, not supporting me, not being proud of me. Managing me like an asset, a resource, a tool to be used for intelligence gathering and money laundering. I looked at the family photos on my laptop screen. All those smiling faces, all those expressions of love and pride and support, none of it had been real. For 28 years, I'd been living in an elaborate intelligence operation designed to exploit my loyalty and my access to classified information. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd trained me to be loyal, reliable, and willing to sacrifice everything for the mission. They just never expected that eventually I'd figure out what the real mission was. And once a Navy SEAL identifies the target, the outcome is never in doubt. The raid began at 0500 hours, exactly 72 hours after that family dinner where they thought they'd successfully manipulated me back into compliance. I wasn't part of the tactical team. Federal policy prohibits military personnel from participating in operations against their own families. But I was positioned in the command vehicle 2 blocks away, watching through drone surveillance, as 8 Navy SEALs from Team Echo surrounded the house where I'd grown up believing in family loyalty. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents had spent 2 years selling information about SEAL Team Echo's operations to foreign intelligence services. Now, Team Echo was about to show them exactly what that intelligence was worth. Team Leader Petty Officer Blake Morrison, a man who'd saved my life in Syria 18 months ago, approached the front door with the kind of tactical precision that my family had been helping enemies counter. Behind him, 7 of the most elite soldiers in the world took positions around the house with movements so fluid they looked choreographed. Through my headset, I could hear Morrison's voice, calm and professional. "Federal agents, we have a warrant. Open the door immediately." I watched through the drone feed as lights flickered on throughout the house. First the master bedroom, then the hallway, then Cassidy's room. They were awake now, probably wondering if this was some kind of nightmare. Morrison knocked again, harder this time. "This is the United States Navy working in conjunction with federal law enforcement. We are executing a search warrant. You have 30 seconds to open this door." Through the thermal imaging, I could see 3 figures moving frantically inside the house. My parents were in the hallway, and it looked like my father was trying to get to something. Probably the safe in his closet where he kept important documents. Cassidy was in her room, and her heat signature suggested she was moving rapidly, likely trying to destroy evidence. "They're stalling," Agent Rodriguez said from the seat next to me in the command vehicle. "Should we give the go-ahead for forced entry?" I looked at the house where I'd spent my childhood, where I'd learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where I'd studied for my Naval Academy entrance exams at the kitchen table. In 30 seconds, that door was going to be breached by federal agents, and my family was going to learn what it felt like to be on the wrong side of American military power. "Give the order," I said. Morrison's voice came through the radio. "Breach in 3, 2, 1. The front door of 1247 Sycamore Drive exploded inward with the controlled violence that makes Navy SEALs the most feared soldiers in the world. Within seconds, the house was flooded with tactical lights and shouted commands. "Federal agents, get on the ground, hands where we can see them." Through the drone feed, I watched my parents stumble out of their bedroom in matching blue pajamas, their hands raised in surrender. My father, who had spent 22 years in the Navy and should have known better than to resist a federal operation, was shouting something I couldn't make out through the commotion. But it was Cassidy's reaction that caught my attention. Instead of surrendering immediately like any rational person would when faced with 8 Navy SEALs, she was still in her room and the thermal imaging showed her making rapid movements near what appeared to be her laptop. "Suspect in the northeast bedroom is destroying evidence. She's got electronic devices." Morrison's voice came back immediately. "Rodriguez, Johnson, northeast bedroom. Preserve any electronic evidence."
I watched 2 SEALs break off from the main group and move towards Cassidy's room with the kind of speed that would have been impossible to counter, even with the intelligence she'd been selling about their tactics. The door burst open, and within seconds they had her on the ground, her laptop secured.
"Device secured," came Rodriguez's voice through the radio. Suspect attempted to initiate a full system wipe, but was unsuccessful. That laptop contained 2 years of communications with foreign intelligence operatives, financial records showing payments from Chinese sources, and detailed information about military families she'd recruited into her network. Cassidy had just tried to destroy evidence that would have protected dozens of other military families from prosecution. The scene in the main hallway was surreal. To watch from the command vehicle, my parents, who had spent years teaching me about honor and duty and sacrifice for country, were on their knees in handcuffs while Navy SEALs, soldiers I had served alongside in combat, read them their rights for treason. Agent Rodriguez handed me a radio. "Lieutenant Commander, your commanding officer is requesting a status update for his report." I took the radio and keyed the microphone. "Captain Hayes, this is Lieutenant Commander Reeves. Operation Homecoming is successful. All 3 targets are in custody and electronic evidence has been preserved." "Understood, Lieutenant Commander. You've done exceptional work under impossible circumstances. The Navy is proud of you." Proud of me? The words I'd waited 28 years to hear from my family were coming from my commanding officer as federal agents arrested my parents for treason. Through the drone feed, I watched as my family was separated and placed in different vehicles. My mother was crying. Whether from genuine emotion or calculated manipulation, I couldn't tell anymore. My father maintained his military bearing even in handcuffs, probably still believing he could talk his way out of this situation. And Cassidy looked angry, like she was personally offended that her criminal enterprise had been disrupted. But the moment that will stay with me forever came as they were loading my parents into the federal transport vehicle. My mother looked directly up at the surveillance drone, and even through the grainy video feed, I could see her mouth the words, "How could you do this to us?" How could I do this to them? After everything they'd done, the manipulation, the lies, the active participation in foreign intelligence operations against their own country, they still thought I was the one who had betrayed the family. Agent Rodriguez noticed my expression. "Lieutenant Commander, you need to understand something. People like your family never see themselves as the villains in their own story. In their minds, they were protecting family interests, and you've chosen strangers over blood." "They weren't strangers," I said, watching the transport vehicles disappear down Sycamore Drive. "They were my teammates, my brothers and sisters in arms, the people I'd die for, who die for me. My family chose foreign enemies over those relationships." The cleanup took another 3 hours. FBI computer specialists removed every electronic device from the house, while counterintelligence agents photographed documents and cataloged evidence. I sat in the command vehicle the entire time, watching my childhood home be systematically dismantled by federal investigators. Around 0800 hours, Morrison approached the command vehicle and knocked on the window. I stepped outside to talk to him, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. 2 Navy SEALs who had bled together in combat, now standing in my childhood neighborhood under circumstances neither of us could have imagined. "Reeves," he said finally, "I want you to know something. What happened in there, what your family did, it doesn't reflect on you. Every man on my team would trust you with their lives, same as always." "Thank you, Petty Officer Morrison. There's something else." He handed me a manila envelope. "We found this in your father's safe. It's addressed to you." The envelope was in my father's handwriting
and it was dated 3 months ago, long before the current crisis, but well after they knew their intelligence activities were being investigated. I opened it carefully, and inside was a single sheet of paper with a message that made my blood run cold. Zara, if you're reading this, then you've chosen your military career over your family. We want you to know that everything we did to protect you. The intelligence work provided us with resources to support your career and cover for your activities that might have compromised your security clearance. We were trying to be the parents you deserved. We hope someday you'll understand that family loyalty should come before loyalty to strangers. We love you, but we can't protect you from the consequences of your choices anymore. Dad. Even in a letter written months before his arrest, my father was still trying to manipulate me. He was trying to reframe their treason as protection, their betrayal as love, their espionage as family loyalty. I handed the letter to Agent Rodriguez, who read it and shook her head. Classic intelligence operative behavior. Even when caught, they try to flip the script and make the victim feel responsible. Morrison was still standing there, and I could see something in his expression. The same look he'd had in Syria when we'd have to leave wounded civilians behind to complete our mission. Reeves, he said quietly, I know this is hard, but you need to understand what you did today saved lives. That intelligence network your family was running, it wasn't just selling information about our operations. It was actively targeting military families for recruitment, exploitation, and compromise.
He handed me another folder. 43 military families were being actively targeted by this network. 8 had already been compromised. Your actions today shut down an operation that could have cost American lives for years to come. 43 families. Men and women who had sworn the same oath I had, who had children they were trying to protect, who trusted that their own government would keep them safe from the kind of threats my family had been enabling. Standing there in front of the house where I'd grown up, watching federal agents finish processing the crime scene, I finally understood what Captain Hayes had meant when he said the Navy was proud of me. I hadn't just chosen my military career over my family. I had chosen 43 military families over 3 traitors who happened to share my DNA. And for the first time in my life, I was proud of myself, too. The social media campaign against me began within hours of the arrests, orchestrated with the same precision my family had used to run their intelligence network. By 1400 hours that same day, my phone was buzzing with notifications from platforms I hadn't checked in months, all carrying this same coordinated message. Lieutenant Commander Zara Reeves was a traitor to her own blood. The first post appeared on my Aunt Linda's Facebook page at 13:47 hours. I know the exact time because Agent Rodriguez was monitoring all family-associated social media accounts for potential security breaches. Linda, my mother's sister who lived in Tennessee and hadn't spoken to our family in 5 years, suddenly had very strong opinions about my character. Heartbroken to learn that my niece Zara has chosen her military career over her own family. Patricia, Robert, and Cassidy Reeves are good people who made mistakes, but family stands by family no matter what. Shame on anyone who would turn their own blood over to the government. #family first, #government overreach, #pray for the Reeves. Within an hour, the post had 43 shares and over 200 comments, most from people I'd never heard of, but who seemed to know intimate details about my family situation. The coordination was too perfect to be organic. Someone was orchestrating this campaign, and they had talking points prepared in advance. My cousin Derek, who I'd grown up with and who'd been at Cassidy's welcome home party just days earlier, posted a long rant on Instagram that read like it had been written by a public relations firm. Can't believe my cousin Zara would destroy her own family like this. These are the people who raised her, supported her, celebrated every achievement. Now she's going to send them to prison because they made some bad financial decisions? The military has brainwashed her into thinking the government matters more than blood. This is what happens when you let your children choose career over family values.
Bad financial decisions. Derek was calling treason against the United States bad financial decisions. But the campaign wasn't limited to extended family. Somehow, people from my high school were getting involved. Neighbors from Sycamore Drive were being interviewed by local news stations. And even former military personnel were weighing in on social media platforms. The narrative was consistent across all platforms. I was an ungrateful daughter who had destroyed a loving family to advance my military career. The local Norfolk news station ran a segment that evening titled "Military Daughter Turns on Family," featuring an interview with Mrs. Henderson, our next-door neighbor for 15 years. She sat in her living room with photos of our family visible on her mantelpieces, talking about how Zara used to be such a sweet girl before the military changed her. I watched Patricia and Robert raise those twins with nothing but love and support. When Cassidy had her troubles, this family pulled together to help her get back on her feet. But Zara, she's become cold, distant. The military has turned her against her own flesh and blood. Mrs. Henderson was at Cassidy's welcome home party. She'd seen our parents celebrate a convicted felon while asking me to stay in a hotel. But on television, she was painting me as the heartless outsider who'd betrayed a loving family. Agent Rodriguez showed me the social media monitoring reports the next morning. Lieutenant Commander, this isn't random community outrage. Look at the timing and coordination of these posts. She pulled up a timeline showing social media activity across multiple platforms. The posts weren't organic reactions. They were going live in coordinated waves, using identical talking points and hashtags. Someone was running a sophisticated disinformation campaign designed to isolate me from community support and paint my family as victims. More concerning, Agent Rodriguez continued, is that some of these accounts are connected to the same foreign intelligence networks your family was working with. This isn't just a family trying to control the narrative. This is an active measures campaign to discredit a federal investigation. Foreign intelligence operatives were using social media to defend my family's treason by attacking my patriotism. The irony was stunning, but the effectiveness was undeniable. By the third day, I was receiving hate mail at the Norfolk Naval Base, death threats through encrypted messaging apps, and phone calls from reporters asking for comment on accusations that I was a military extremist who had destroyed an innocent family.
The most painful attack came from someone I'd trusted. Chaplain Williams from the base chapel, a man who'd counseled me through deployment stress and celebrated my promotions, posted a message on the base's internal bulletin board that cut deeper than any foreign propaganda. I'm deeply concerned about Lieutenant Commander Reeves' actions against her family. While I respect her service record, I question whether someone who could betray their own blood can truly be trusted with the sacred duties of military service. Family loyalty is the foundation of all other loyalties. If we can't trust our families, how can we trust our country? Sacred duties. A military chaplain was questioning my fitness for service because I'd reported treason to federal authorities. But the campaign reached its peak when my high school arranged a prayer circle for the Reeves family in the gymnasium where I'd played volleyball for 4 years. Local news covered the event, showing over 200 people holding candles and praying for my parents and Cassidy while calling for my spiritual healing from what they called military indoctrination. The guest speaker was Pastor Reynolds from Millbrook Heights Baptist Church, where my family had attended services for 20 years. He stood at a podium decorated with photos of my family. Notably, none of the photos included me, and delivered what amounted to a sermon against federal law enforcement. Tonight, we pray for a family torn apart by government overreach, he said, his voice carrying the authority that had convinced me to get baptized at age 16. Patricia, Robert, and Cassidy Reeves are victims of a system that turns children against parents, that teaches young people to value career advancement over family bonds. He held up a Bible and continued, "The good book tells us to honor our father and mother. It doesn't say to honor them only when they're perfect, only when they meet government standards, only when their mistakes don't embarrass us. It says to honor them because they gave us life." The crowd responded with amens and "that's right," and I watched from my hotel room as 200 people who'd known me since childhood prayed for God to soften my heart toward the family I'd betrayed.
Local businesses started getting involved. The hardware store where my father had worked part-time after retiring from the Navy put up a sign reading, "Support the Reeves family, victims of government persecution." The coffee shop where I'd worked during high school posted on Facebook about how heartbroken they were to see sweet little Zara turn against the family who'd sacrificed everything for her military career. The pressure campaign extended to my professional life when 3 retired Navy officers, men who'd never met me but who'd served with my father decades earlier, sent a formal complaint to my commanding officer questioning my fitness for continued service given her willingness to betray family loyalty for career advancement. Captain Hayes called me into his office to discuss the complaint, and I could see the strain the situation was putting on him. Military commanders aren't trained to handle cases where federal heroes become local villains. He said, "Lieutenant Commander, I want you to know that this complaint has no merit and will not affect your service record. However, I'm concerned about your psychological well-being given the community pressure you're facing." I said, "Sir, I'm managing the situation appropriately." He said, "Are you? Because the base chaplain has requested permission to counsel you about family reconciliation. 3 different media outlets have requested interviews about your transformation from loving daughter to military extremist, and your hometown has essentially declared you persona non grata." He was right. In less than a week, I'd gone from decorated Navy SEAL to community pariah. The same people who had celebrated my military achievements were now using them as evidence of my corruption by government authority. But the breaking point came when I received a package at the naval base with no return address. Inside was a hand-knitted scarf, the same pattern my grandmother had taught me when I was 8 years old, along with a note written in my mother's handwriting. "Zara, this scarf was made by women from our church who remember when you were a sweet little girl who loved her family. They're praying that you'll remember who you used to be before the military changed you. You can still fix this, honey. You can still choose family over strangers. All you have to do is tell the truth, that you were confused, manipulated by federal agents who don't understand family loyalty. Come home, baby girl. We forgive you, Mom." The scarf smelled like my grandmother's house, like Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings, and everything I'd lost when I chose duty over denial. For a moment, sitting alone in my base quarters, I almost wavered. Then I remembered the surveillance footage of my mother introducing Cassidy to Chinese intelligence operatives, and I put the scarf in the evidence box Agent Rodriguez had given me for documenting intimidation attempts.
Because that's what this was. Not love, not forgiveness, not community concern. It was a sophisticated psychological warfare campaign designed to break my resolve and compromise a federal investigation. They'd underestimated one crucial factor. Navy SEALs are trained to operate in hostile territory, surrounded by enemies who want to break them psychologically before they break them physically. And I was just getting started. The mandatory psychological evaluation was scheduled for 0800 hours on a Tuesday morning at the Norfolk Naval Medical Center, ordered by Captain Hayes after the community pressure campaign had reached what he called unprecedented levels of coordinated harassment. I sat across from Dr. Rachel Armstrong, a civilian contractor who specialized in military personnel dealing with family conflicts, feeling like I was about to be dissected by someone who couldn't possibly understand what I'd been through. "Lieutenant Commander Reeves," Dr. Armstrong began, her voice carrying the kind of professional neutrality that immediately put me on guard. "I want you to know that this evaluation is not punitive. Command has made it clear that your actions regarding your family's criminal activities were not only appropriate, but heroic. This session is about ensuring you have the psychological support you need to process what you've experienced." Heroic. It was the first time in 2 weeks anyone had used that word to describe my actions, instead of words like betrayal or heartless or brainwashed. "However," she continued, consulting her notes, "the level of community and family pressure you're experiencing is unusual, even for cases involving military personnel reporting family crimes. I'd like to understand how this situation developed, starting from the beginning."
I'd been dreading this question because answering it meant admitting something I'd never said out loud, that my entire childhood had been a lie designed to create a perfect intelligence asset. Dr. Armstrong, when did you first realize your parents saw you differently than your sister? The question hit me like a sniper's bullet, precise, unexpected, and devastating in its accuracy. I sat there for a full minute trying to process why that question felt so dangerous to answer. I... I'm not sure what you mean. Let me rephrase, Dr. Armstrong said, leaning forward slightly. When did you first feel responsible for managing your family's problems? And suddenly, I was 8 years old again, standing in our kitchen while my mother cried over unpaid bills and my father worked late to avoid coming home to the stress. Cassidy was upstairs playing with dolls, but I was downstairs trying to figure out how to fix everything. I was 8, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. My parents were fighting about money, and Cassidy was scared, so I went through my piggy bank and gave my mother all my birthday money, $43. She cried and hugged me and told me I was her little helper, and that she didn't know what the family would do without me. Dr. Armstrong made a note. And how did that make you feel? Important. Special. Like I had a purpose. I paused, realizing how that sounded, but also responsible. Like if I didn't help, if I didn't fix things, the family would fall apart. What about Cassidy? What was her role during family crises? I had to think about that because the honest answer was uncomfortable. Cassidy was protected. When there were problems, my parents would send her to her room or to a friend's house. They said she was too sensitive to handle family stress. So you became the problem solver, and she became the person whose problems needed solving. The accuracy of that observation was like a physical blow. For 20 years, I'd been cleaning up Cassidy's messes while my parents protected her from the consequences of her actions. And I thought that made me important, valuable, loved. Dr. Armstrong continued her questioning with surgical precision. When you joined the military, how did your family react? They were proud, I said automatically, then stopped. Actually, no. They were confused. My mother asked if I wasn't sure I'd rather go to a regular college and find a husband. My father said military service was fine for people who couldn't do anything else, but I was smart enough for better options. But you'd already been accepted to the Naval Academy. Top 5% of applicants, full scholarship, guaranteed commission upon graduation. I could hear the defensiveness in my own voice. But they kept asking if I was sure I wanted to throw away my potential on a military career. How did they react to your achievements during your military service? This question opened a floodgate I hadn't realized was holding back decades of suppressed memories. Every phone call home to share good news about commendations, promotions, successful missions. Every conversation where my achievements were met with polite acknowledgement followed immediately by updates about Cassidy's latest crisis. They were distracted. Every time I called with good news, they had bad news about Cassidy. When I made lieutenant, Cassidy had been arrested for shoplifting. When I completed SEAL training, Cassidy had dropped out of college. When I received my first combat commendation, Cassidy had been fired from her job for stealing. Dr. Armstrong looked up from her notes. That's an interesting pattern. Did you ever notice the timing?
The timing. For the first time, I considered whether the coordination between my successes and Cassidy's crises might have been deliberate. Every moment when I should have felt celebrated, supported, acknowledged for extraordinary achievement, I was instead worried about family emergencies and focused on solving problems. Dr. Armstrong, I said slowly, are you suggesting my family deliberately created crises to overshadow my achievements? I'm asking you to consider what you observe. You're trained in pattern recognition, Lieutenant Commander.
What patterns do you see? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through years of text messages and emails. The pattern was undeniable once I started looking for it. Every significant military achievement I'd earned was followed within days by a family emergency requiring my immediate attention and usually my financial assistance. Naval Academy graduation, Cassidy's emergency room visit for food poisoning that required someone to pay for her ambulance and hospital bills. SEAL training completion, my father's emergency car repair that cost exactly the amount of my signing bonus. First combat deployment, my mother's surprise medical bills that needed immediate payment to avoid credit damage. Promotion to lieutenant, Cassidy's arrest for check fraud, requiring bail money and legal fees. Combat commendation, family vacation that they couldn't afford but had already booked, needing my financial help to avoid embarrassing cancellation. They trained me, I said quietly, the realization hitting like a physical blow. Every time I achieved something that should have made me feel independent, successful, valuable on my own terms, they created a crisis that reminded me my real value was in solving their problems. Dr. Armstrong nodded. Classic manipulation pattern. They couldn't allow you to develop an identity separate from your utility to the family system. Your success threatened their control, so they consistently redirected your attention back to family dysfunction. But why? If they were proud of my military service, if it reflected well on them, why undermine it? Lieutenant Commander, from what you've described, I don't think they were proud of your military service. I think they were threatened by it. Your success meant you might develop loyalty to something other than family. Your security clearance meant you had access to information and resources they wanted to control. Your training meant you might eventually recognize their manipulation patterns. She leaned back in her chair. Everything you've described suggests your parents weren't raising a daughter. They were developing an asset. Someone with military training, security clearance, and access to classified information, but whose primary loyalty would always be to family rather than country. An asset. Not a daughter. Not even a tool. An intelligence asset developed from birth to serve their interests while believing she was serving family loyalty. Dr. Armstrong? I said slowly. There's something else. When I was 12, maybe 13, I started having nightmares about being captured by enemy forces. Not normal deployment anxiety, specific scenarios where I was being interrogated about my family, where I had to choose between protecting classified information and protecting the people I loved. Those weren't nightmares, Lieutenant Commander. Those were training scenarios your subconscious was working through. Your parents had already begun programming you to prioritize family over security protocols. The room was spinning as decades of carefully constructed identity collapsed around me. Every childhood memory, every family dinner, every expression of love and pride and support, all of it designed to create the perfect double agent. The worst part, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, is that when I saw them being arrested, when I watched federal agents take them away in handcuffs, part of me wanted to fix it. Part of me was still trying to figure out how to solve their problem. That response isn't weakness, Lieutenant Commander. It's evidence of how thoroughly they had conditioned you. The fact that you were able to overcome that conditioning and choose national security over family manipulation is remarkable. Then why do I feel like I've lost everything? Because you have lost everything. The family you thought you had never existed. The love you thought you'd earned was conditional on your utility. The support system you'd depended on was actually a control mechanism. She paused, letting that sink in. But what you've gained is something more valuable. The truth about who you really are when you're not being manipulated. And who is that? Someone strong enough to choose country over comfort. Someone loyal enough to protect 43 military families from the people who should have protected her. Someone brave enough to face the truth
even when it destroys everything she thought she knew about herself. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than guilt or anger or confusion. I felt proud. Not of my family, not of solving their problems, not of being their perfect asset.
I felt proud of Lieutenant Commander Zara Reeves, United States Navy SEALs, the woman who'd chosen duty over manipulation, truth over comfort, and country over the people who'd tried to use her love against her. That woman didn't need their approval anymore. The first test came 6 weeks after the arrests, delivered through the most unexpected messenger possible, my 8-year-old nephew, Tyler, Cassidy's son, who I didn't even know existed until he showed up at the Norfolk Naval Base Visitor Center asking to see Aunt Zara. I was in a classified briefing when security called to inform me that a minor claiming to be my family member was requesting access to the base. My immediate thought was that this was another manipulation attempt, possibly involving a child actor hired to exploit my emotions. But when I saw him through the security office window, small, scared, clutching a worn backpack like a life preserver, I knew this was real. Tyler had Cassidy's eyes, but none of her calculated cunning. He sat across from me in the family conference room, his legs swinging from the chair that was too big for him, and delivered a message that cut deeper than any federal investigation could. "Aunt Zara," he said in the matter-of-fact way children deliver devastating news, "Mommy told me to tell you that she's sick and needs medicine that costs a lot of money. She said you're the only one who can help because you have a good job, and she can't work because she's in jail." A child. They were using a child as their messenger, someone I couldn't interrogate or dismiss or analyze for manipulation tactics without looking like a monster. "Tyler, who brought you here? How did you get to the base?" "Grandma Linda drove me, but she waited in the car because she said military places make her nervous. She gave me money for a taxi back." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. "She said to tell you that Mommy is really, really sick and might die if she doesn't get medicine." Grandma Linda, my mother's sister who'd led the social media campaign against me. She'd driven a child 4 hours from Tennessee to Norfolk to deliver a message designed to exploit every protective instinct I'd ever felt. "Tyler, can you tell me what kind of medicine your mommy needs?" "She needs the kind that costs $20,000 and has to come from a special place. Grandma Linda said you could pay for it because you make money protecting people and Mommy is people too." $20,000. The exact amount needed for Cassidy's legal defense fund, reframed as life-saving medicine to make refusing seem like letting a child's mother die. I spent an hour with Tyler, buying him lunch from the base cafeteria, and listening to him talk about his school, his friends, and his confusion about why his mother was staying in a special hotel where you can't leave. By the time Grandma Linda picked him up, I had all the evidence I needed that this visit had been carefully orchestrated, but I also had something I hadn't expected: genuine concern for a child whose entire family was using him as a psychological weapon. That night, I called Dr. Armstrong for an emergency session. They sent an 8-year-old to manipulate me into funding their legal defense fund. A child who doesn't understand that his mother is in federal prison for treason. "How do you feel about that, Lieutenant Commander?" "Furious, but also," I paused, trying to identify the emotion, "protective. Tyler doesn't deserve to be weaponized like this. He's innocent. And what do you plan to do about that feeling?" Dr. Armstrong's question forced me to confront the hardest truth yet. Caring about Tyler's welfare didn't mean I had to enable his family's manipulation. I could protect him by refusing to participate in the system that was exploiting him. The second test came 2 weeks later in the form of a medical emergency that wasn't fabricated. My father suffered a heart attack in federal holding, and the prison medical facility was requesting family consent for emergency cardiac surgery that could save his life. Agent Rodriguez called me at 0300 hours with the news. "Lieutenant Commander, your father is in critical condition at Norfolk General Hospital. The surgery has a good chance of success, but they need next of kin authorization within the hour." I drove to the hospital in my civilian clothes, my hands shaking as I tried to process the fact that the man who'd raised me, the man who'd also betrayed everything I stood for, might die while handcuffed to a hospital bed. The cardiac surgeon, Dr. Martinez, met me in the hallway outside the ICU. "Ms. Reeves, your father's condition is serious but treatable. The surgery will cost approximately $40,000, and while the federal system will cover basic care, the advanced procedures that give him the best chance of full recovery aren't included." $40,000. Another carefully calculated amount designed to test whether I'd compromise my principles to save my father's life. Doctor, what happens if he receives only the basic care? 60% chance of survival, high probability of permanent disability. With the advanced procedures, 90% chance of full recovery.
I stood there in the sterile hospital hallway, wearing the same clothes I'd worn to briefings about counterterrorism operations, and realized that my father's life was being held hostage by the same people who'd programmed me to sacrifice everything for family. Dr. Martinez, I'll authorize the basic care covered by federal medical protocols. If my father wants the advanced procedures, he can discuss payment options with the hospital's financial office. The doctor looked shocked. Miss Reeves, this is your father's life we're talking about. Yes, it is. And it's also a decision he can make for himself when he's conscious. I signed the basic authorization papers and left the hospital without seeing my father. Not because I didn't love him, but because I finally understood that love without boundaries isn't love. It's enablement. My father survived the surgery and made a full recovery using only the basic procedures. When he was conscious enough to understand his situation, he chose not to pursue the advanced treatments that would have required family financial assistance. The final test came 3 months later, disguised as a moment of victory. The federal prosecutors had built an airtight case against my family and their intelligence network, but they offered me a deal that would have resolved everything in a way that looked like mercy. Deputy Director Chen called me to her office at Norfolk Naval Base for what she called a final consultation on the case. Lieutenant Commander Reeves, she began, opening a thick legal folder. The prosecution team has an offer that I think you should consider. Given your cooperation and the exceptional circumstances of this case, they're willing to offer your family a plea agreement that would result in significantly reduced sentences. She slid a document across the desk. Your parents would serve 2 years in minimum security federal prison. Your sister would serve 5 years with possibility of parole in 3. In exchange, they would provide complete cooperation with ongoing counterintelligence operations, including testimony against the foreign operatives they worked with. 2 years for my parents, 3 for Cassidy. They would be out before Tyler reached high school, free to rebuild their lives and continue the manipulation patterns that had defined our family for decades. What's the alternative? I asked. Full prosecution under the Espionage Act. Your parents are looking at 15 to 20 years each. Your sister could receive life in prison without parole for her role in recruiting military families and providing intelligence that endangered American operations. Life in prison. The woman who'd raised me, alongside Cassidy, who taught me to tie my shoes and helped me with homework, could spend the rest of her life in federal prison because I'd chosen duty over family loyalty? Deputy Director Chen, what impact would this plea agreement have on the counterintelligence investigation? Honestly, it would compromise our ability to fully prosecute the foreign operatives involved. Your family's cooperation would be valuable, but it would also mean giving immunity to people who enabled significant intelligence breaches. I thought about Tyler, confused and scared and being used as a weapon by adults who should have protected him. I thought about the 43 military families my parents had helped target for recruitment by foreign intelligence services. I thought about the teammates who trusted me with their lives while my family was selling information about our operations to enemy agents. I can't make this decision for the prosecutors, but I can tell you that I won't support any agreement that prioritizes my family's comfort over national security or the safety of other military families. Deputy Director Chen nodded her head. I'll convey your position to the prosecution team. 6 months later, my parents were sentenced to 18 years each in federal prison. Cassidy received life without parole for her role as the primary recruiter and intelligence coordinator.
The foreign operatives they'd worked with were successfully prosecuted using evidence gathered during the investigation. Tyler was placed in foster care with a military family in Tennessee who specialized in helping children of incarcerated parents. I established a trust fund for his education and therapy, managed by the Department of Veterans Affairs, that would provide support without enabling the extended family members who tried to exploit him. I never visited my parents in prison. I never accepted their calls or responded to their letters, not because I stopped loving them, but because I finally understood that some forms of love are toxic, and healing sometimes requires complete separation from the people who taught you to confuse loyalty with self-destruction. The final test wasn't from my family, it was from myself. 6 months after the sentencing, I was offered a promotion to Lieutenant Colon and a transfer to a prestigious assignment at the Pentagon. It was everything I'd worked for, recognition that my actions had been not just appropriate, but exemplary. I turned it down. Instead, I requested assignment to a SEAL team focused on counterintelligence operations, hunting down the networks that recruit and exploit military families the way mine had been recruited and exploited.
Because I'd learned something important during those months of tests and trials and choices between family and duty. The best way to honor the people who raised you isn't to enable their worst behaviors. It's to make sure they can never hurt anyone else the way they hurt you. 2 years later, I stood in the briefing room at Counterintelligence Command watching surveillance footage of another military family being approached by foreign operatives, and I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood. The satisfaction of protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Lieutenant Commander Reeves, said Agent Martinez, Rodriguez had been promoted to Deputy Director after our success with Operation Homecoming. We've identified a pattern identical to what your family was involved in. Navy spouse approached at a coffee shop, offered money for general information about military life, gradually escalated to specific intelligence requests. The woman on the surveillance screen was 26 years old, married to a Navy pilot, mother of 2 children under 5. She looked tired, overwhelmed, and desperately in need of the easy money the foreign operative was offering her. She looked exactly like every military spouse who'd been targeted by the network my family had helped build. "What's our timeline for intervention?" I asked. "We could move now, but we'd prefer to gather more evidence about the scope of the network. Let them develop the relationship for another month, see how many other families they're targeting." Another month of watching a young mother be manipulated and exploited by people who understood exactly how to weaponize financial stress and family loyalty. Another month of letting children be put at risk while we gathered evidence. Lieutenant Commander Reeves, with respect, I recommend we intervene immediately. This family has 2 young children, and the psychological damage from prolonged involvement in intelligence operations can take decades to repair. I should know. We moved that afternoon. Instead of letting the recruitment continue, we approached the Navy spouse, Sarah Chen, no relation to the deputy director, with a carefully planned intervention that gave her the choice to become a cooperating witness rather than an unwitting victim. "Mrs. Chen," I said, sitting across from her in the same type of coffee shop where my sister had first met Marcus Chen, "I'm Lieutenant Commander Reeves with Naval Counterintelligence. We believe you've been approached by individuals who are not what they claim to be." The relief on her face was immediate and overwhelming. I knew something was wrong. The questions they were asking, the amount of money they were offering, it didn't make sense for the research they claimed to be doing. "You're not in trouble, Mrs. Chen. You're the victim of a recruitment operation targeting military families. We'd like to offer you the chance to help us shut down this network before they target other families like yours." She agreed to cooperate immediately, and within 2 weeks, we'd identified and arrested 12 foreign operatives and prevented the recruitment of 37 military families. More importantly, we developed a new protocol for early intervention that prioritized protecting families over gathering evidence. That operation became the model for everything I've done since leaving my family behind. Instead of cleaning up messes after families were destroyed, we started preventing the destruction in the first place. My new life isn't built around fixing other people's problems or earning love through sacrifice.
It's built around using my experience to protect people who are facing the same manipulation I survived. Every network we shut down, every family we save from recruitment, every child who grows up without being weaponized by the adults who should protect them, that's my real family now. I live in a small apartment near the Norfolk Naval Base, decorated with commendations from counterintelligence operations instead of family photos. My refrigerator holds schedules for training exercises and deployment rotations instead of graduation announcements and wedding invitations. My emergency contacts are teammates who would die for me and whom I would die for, rather than people who would exploit that loyalty for personal gain. The loneliness I'd expected never materialized because I'd confused isolation with independence. When you stop being available for manipulation, you become available for genuine relationships. My SEAL team operates like the family I'd always thought I had, loyal, supportive, protective, but never demanding that loyalty be proven through self-destruction. Last month, I received a letter from Tyler, now 11 years old and thriving in his foster placement. His new family, the Williamses, a retired Army colonel and his wife, had helped him write to thank me for the education fund and to share his report card. Straight A's, soccer team captain, no behavioral problems, no signs of the psychological damage I had feared from his early exposure to family manipulation. Dear Aunt Zara, the letter began, Mom and Dad Williams say you're the reason I get to go to good schools and have a therapist who helps me understand feelings. I don't remember much about before, but I remember you being kind to me at the big building with the flags. I hope you're proud of me because I'm proud of you. Love, Tyler.
I'm proud of him. And more importantly, I'm proud of the decision to protect him by refusing to enable the people who would have used him as a weapon for the rest of his childhood. I never received letters from my parents or Cassidy, and I never expected to. People who spend decades manipulating someone don't suddenly develop genuine emotional connections when the manipulation stops working. What I did receive through Agent Martinez was information that my father had died in federal prison 8 months ago from complications related to his heart condition. I felt sadness about his death, but it was the clean sadness of mourning someone I'd genuinely loved who had made choices that put him beyond my ability to help, not the complicated grief of someone who died while I was still being manipulated by them. My mother is still alive, serving her sentence in a federal facility in West Virginia. According to prison records, she's become a model prisoner, leading Bible study groups and counseling other inmates about the importance of family forgiveness. Even in prison, she's found a way to manipulate people by positioning herself as a victim of government overreach who maintains faith in family values. Some patterns never change. But I've changed. The woman who walked into that kitchen 2 years ago, desperate for family approval and willing to sacrifice anything to earn love, no longer exists. She was replaced by someone who understands that real love doesn't require you to compromise your principles, ignore red flags, or enable destructive behavior. Lieutenant Commander Zara Reeves doesn't need anyone's permission to exist, doesn't require family approval to feel valuable, and doesn't measure her worth by her ability to solve other people's problems. She measures it by her ability to protect the innocent, serve her country, and maintain the boundaries that keep toxic people from weaponizing her loyalty. 3 weeks ago, I was approached by a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell the story of the Navy SEAL who chose country over family. I declined the interview because that framing misses the point entirely. I didn't choose country over family. I chose truth over manipulation, health over dysfunction, protection over enabling. I chose to break a cycle of exploitation that had been damaging military families for years, and I chose to use my experience to prevent other families from suffering the same fate. The real story isn't about choosing sides in some conflict between family loyalty and patriotic duty. It's about recognizing that people who truly love you don't force you to choose between them and your principles. They don't exploit your loyalty to enable their crimes. They don't use your children as weapons in psychological warfare campaigns.
They love you enough to let you be the person your training, your values, and your conscience tell you to be. Last week, I was promoted to lieutenant colonel and given command of a new counterintelligence unit focused exclusively on protecting military families from foreign recruitment operations. My team consists of 8 Navy SEALs and 6 FBI agents, all of whom have personal experience with family manipulation or intelligence exploitation. We're not just hunting foreign operatives anymore. We're building something new. A support system for military personnel who find themselves in impossible situations involving family loyalty and national security. A place where choosing duty over dysfunction is celebrated rather than questioned. On my office wall, next to my commission and my commendations, hangs a framed photo of 43 military families. The families that were targeted by the network my parents helped build, all of whom were protected because I chose to report rather than enable. 43 families who get to stay together because I was willing to let mine fall apart. 43 sets of children who will grow up safe because I was willing to acknowledge that some adults don't deserve the loyalty they demand. 43 military personnel who can serve their country without worrying that their own families are selling their secrets to foreign enemies. That's my real legacy. Not the daughter who destroyed her family, but the officer who saved dozens of others. And every morning when I put on my uniform, every time I brief my team on a new operation, every family we protect from the kind of manipulation I survived, I remember something important. The people who raised you don't get to define you forever. Eventually, you get to choose who you become. I chose to become someone worth protecting. And that choice, not the circumstances that forced it, is what I'm proud of. Lieutenant Colonel Zara Reeves, United States Navy SEALs, Counterintelligence Operations Commander, Protector of Military Families, and finally, completely and permanently free.